Hello ladies and gentlemen, Dave Dobbs here. It's the 21st of September 2024 and oh my goodness me, what an interesting time. It's it's funny I've got you out here on the Trump speech. Trump delivers remarks at the Israeli-American Council in Washington, and I won't play you this little bit simply because I don't know if I've got permission to do it. I don't know how it works, but there the time on that is I don't know how that works, but it was a time, it was minus 29.45. What he says there about how he's willing to support Israel and the measures he'll go to and what this is really all about, it really quite shocks me. But and all that's happened over the last few days, it's been a lot to go through, so we're just going to try and well, let's bring this to where I've come into this most of this time, is this astronomical period. And we've kind of if of those of you who are kind of keeping a kind of ear to the ground, so to speak, seismically and volcanically, Kilauea volcano eruption update, new fissure erupts in Nepal crater. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Kilauea on the Big Island in Hawaii. Now I've been saying that volcanoes will be going off in the northern hemisphere, and we did see Iceland going off. It only stopped about 2 weeks ago. And it went on for 3 weeks, so I haven't made a video since it began. And when it began, I was thinking, oh my goodness me, is this it? Is this the big one? But uncanny, because it was something so high in the northern. I wasn't expecting a volcano that high in the northern hemisphere. But nonetheless, that's what we kind of got, and then it went on. And you remember that when I'm talking about my astronomical model, this is what I brought into the last model. I don't know if you remember these, the stones of the Druids. I found that really interesting. Anyway, the getting back to where we are right now in my current model. Let's come to our time right now, 24th. So we're in coming round. We notice we've got Kerberos and Charon coming in, and remember, if we go a year before this sort of time, do you remember this big sighting coming in, and then this big sighting coming in? And I said you'd see them, and so this is when this Charon and what I call Kerberos, the twins, when they were crossing. They've been crossing at this period, and then before they were crossing over here. But what's happening is that as we get round to Earth gets round to here, you'll see where Kerberos is there, and Charon. They've kind of gone past us. We're carrying on, and they've gone past us. The closest point was crossing here, and then but going past us there. And if we come to this year again, we'll kind of come to the beginning of this year, and we can see we've actually carried on a lot further this time. And as they're coming out, this one here is coming right behind us. Can you see? And it's coming along here, and forget the Jupiter one, the big blue one for a shake. Remember I showed you that just now. That was the blue one coming past us when we were going into the night sky. But before it had gone into the night sky, we'd got 61 volcanoes going off here, so we knew we were next to massive activity. And this is this Jupiter aspect. I know I bunched them all up together, but like I say, I'm trying to squeeze all of this massive model into a single frame. So it's a very, very difficult thing to get that type of precision when I'm dealing with this, with the kind of with a very limited understanding of the kind of software I'm attempting to use here to define that. But nonetheless, Mr. MBB333 posted that of the big blue one, and we're going to talk about the big blue one and the pair, which are all affecting us now. We're seeing them all. So you can imagine that we were seeing that as well. So we had 61 volcanoes simultaneously going off as we approached this time last year. So every year it's been exponentially getting bigger. I'm not expecting anything less than exponentially bigger than 61 erupting volcanoes this year, because it's been exponentially bigger. Or maybe last year was the biggest, closest flyby. Maybe this whole thing is waning out now. Only time will tell. I'm just running this. If you were to look at all the patterns from 2017 of the massive increase in volcanoes, and you laid them all in a chart from 2017 of how many volcanoes were active from, say, kind of July till October, from 2017 up till this time last year, when 61 volcanoes. You can remember, I was just like, when I turned up at the Extinction Rebellion in 2017, and I said in September, whatever it was, the date I gave, the 28th, that a load of volcanoes would go off, and 9 volcanoes went off simultaneously. I was just like, oh my god, 9 volcanoes. So suddenly it goes, you can see when we're going up to 61 volcanoes. Anyway, we were talking about exponential increase, and you're also talking about the effects of these volcanoes exponentially increasing, which is basically rain and storms. That's the biggest effect, because they're heating the oceans, so they're sending up loads of moisture into the atmosphere. They're sending up loads and loads of particles, and that moisture is condensing on those particles, and it's absorbing this massive volume of water, and the more water it throws up into the atmosphere, the more particles there are to absorb it. It's a symbiotic, absolute, exponentially increasing thing. As the water vapor increases and the particles increase, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. If you looked at it on the chart, you wouldn't absolutely know that in coming to that part of September, October, that it would absolutely guarantee it would be exponentially bigger than 61 volcanoes simultaneously erupting. But looking at that chart, quite simply, from 2017, 2018, remember Kilauea last went off, the first big long duration, the 5 week long duration, the first of the big long duration volcanoes that we've seen in our little epoch at this side of at the beginning of the 21st century was Kilauea on May the 4th, 2018. So we've seen this massive steady increase. It's not absolutely absurd to look at that and think, oh my god, what is causing this? What is making this happen? Why this massive release? Remembering our local volcano. I know I repeat this, but our local volcano, my local volcano to me, yes, probably is kind of like it's somewhere between Iceland and Stromboli and Etna, and I'm honestly not too sure, but I guess it's probably Stromboli, Etna. But Stromboli is like a small volcano. It's only 80 million tons of carbon dioxide on a single eruption. Only. It's a small volcano. You can imagine big volcanoes like Popocatépetl in Mexico, or Chevauche on the Kamchatka Peninsula coming down from Russia that goes into the Pacific Basin. Massive volcanoes coming up close to 300 million tons of carbon dioxide in a single eruption, and we've got all these carbon stories running and that sort of stuff that we've blinded and blocked off the story of volcanoes. We've tried to desperately normalise every part of the insanity that is going on around us to sweep it all under the carpet. So we can't. So there you've got the map there, but we come back to Kilauea. We see this shot. This was posted, that was 16 hours ago, but it's probably the best part of it, a day ago or something. I'm not too sure how recent this footage is, but by the sounds of it, it was recent. And I believe, I'm not too sure where it was seen, but I think it was in America. I think I've seen a few videos talking about it, but I've certainly seen this on third phase of the moon. I'm not going to enlarge it or run it. I'll just let you go to the footage and check that out. You check that out yourself. But now people are saying that could be the storm system. There was a storm system near the city this was occurring, so it could be that. But when I saw this shot captured over Spain, Tenerife, sorry, Spain I guess, but the little island of Tenerife, very close to La Palma, going off, and he posted this 3 days ago. No, that's probably longer than that actually. 10 days ago. Sorry, apologies. 10 days ago. And notice that there were this to me. I look at this and I see two flybys. These two flybys coming in and coming round. They're coming round, and when I'm thinking they're about to do a big flyby, but rather than crossing our path, coming either from north to south, bam, or south to north, you know, they're tracking round with us as we go round. So we're seeing these objects, as I show here in this model. They're both, that's 2024, but let's just come to 2023. Sorry, go in the right direction. Actually, let's. I hope that doesn't work. I'm installing my computer. Excuse me if my fan starts going now. Let's come to 2000, where we're seeing them coming in, Kerberos and Sharon there, coming past us. Now, as we're going out, as we're coming around here, we're seeing these objects coming in and going out. They're not actually that close to us. You know, we're just seeing it. We've long since passed. We're not at a close transit point. We're just getting these epic views of them, and they're coming round here, and we're watching them. So they're more like over here now, if you like. You know, they're not crossing our path over this point. They're coming round. We're seeing them in the background coming over here, and we're seeing them capture the light somewhere between this, yeah, very possibly over here, but it's very difficult to say. But in my opinion, you're looking at the whole object there. I know it looks like a cloud, and it's immediately, but it's literally out in space, in my opinion. That could obviously be dust from the tail dropping down through the atmosphere, and as it drops down, it reacts with the atmosphere, and it acts like dust does from the volcanoes. How dust, what happens is when dust kind of enters into the atmosphere, say, then that's what this could be. I'm not saying it absolutely isn't. This could be a flyby. I've never seen a cloud system do that in all my life and all the years I've been observing, and we've seen the biggest and best probably the world has ever seen, for, you know, in terms of just because of our ability to capture it with all these different cameras, our access to all this data. We've seen them all, and we've never ever seen anything like this. This is either a spaceship hiding in a cloud, or it's out in space, but it just looks so fantastical. You just can't quite believe, you can't allow yourself to even conceive or consider how, but actually that's really far away, because if this thing is close to us, we get something like, let's come to this same object, or one of the same objects doing, do you remember 2020 in October the 15th, was it 2020? This shot here. This was caught by Calvin looking for Hobbs. It was just an absolutely incredible. That's when you're really close to it. It just completely consumes the entire skyline. This thing, though it's fantastical, is distant. That's not close by. You know, this is not, we're just getting a wonderful view of it. And that's it coming in. And, you know, well, like I say, you kind of like, you come back to the different shots we've seen of these pairs as they come in. and that of mine is the pair there coming in, or going out, as it were. Oh no, I guess coming in because of the angle of them, they're like coming in there. But you know, the 2000 and this shot here of the pair. Becky Lewis caught this as a pair. This was a distance shot of the pair, but it was the first time it was the second time we'd seen the pair. The first time was on 14th or 15th of February 2012, and there were two little tiny, no, 2013, the day before we had the asteroid coming in over, day before, the day after we had the asteroid coming in over Russia. But we saw the pair as well, so they were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And all that's been happening is that they've just been coming closer and closer to the ecliptic plane. Like in 2011, I know I talk about this so much, but in 2011, you saw, you know, on the 11th of March 2011, you saw Fukushima, and this object, the first of the pair cutting through. The year before, the next one that sits that sits behind this one, but they run together, but one runs in front of the other, and that was when they came from. That's the 27th of February 2010, the massive 8.8 earthquake that happened in Chile, and then the day before, on the 26th of February, the massive volcano, single day, single burst eruption in Iceland that stopped all the air travel. You know, that's between this one and Fukushima. That's a 1 year and 13-day difference in astronomical positions. That marks the two biggest seismic events outside of the 2004 kind of like Boxing Day tsunami that affected, you know, Indonesia and India and Thailand, and just massive. These patterns are just absolutely pristine. So whatever this is, I was expecting that, but I'm not expecting that to be the big flyby. I'm expecting this year to be this one. This was caught, like I say, you know, 2nd of June 2023, caught during US Masters golf tournament. It's the camera looking at the fairway, the kind of like the commentator just commentating on the cloud, he has to call it, when it's clearly, what is that? What is that? Other than a massive blue planet. Massive blue planet of absolutely unbelievable proportions. And the mechanics of it are obvious. Everything about this is obvious, I think. So what have we seen when we saw this going on? You know, we're on about the, I don't know how many days now, but we're only about 4 or 5 days into this now. And when this started, so it begins. And when this started, you had this whole talk about Starmer trying to get Biden to agree on long-range missiles. So this is the political front to this. This is how this is all going to step up, because this is all going to be about attempting to lower and prove that humanity is of war, because we will attempt to plunge the vibration in this because of how this is working, it seems. And now the supposed, remembering the day after this was about, well, this, this was about 4 or 5 days ago now. So the day after this, where we hear that that Biden has said it's just they've got elections coming up, too risky to agree on long-range missiles. And then the next day, Zelensky meets Keir Starmer. And almost every video about him meeting Keir Starmer has now been deleted. It's really strange. It's really strange. But the day after that meeting, you know, Zelensky was, a quote, well, as far as I heard, it was said he'd got what he wanted. And what he wanted was long-range missiles. Storm Shadow missiles, I'm assuming. That's the name that's been battered around over the internet over the last little while, that he was trying to get Storm Shadow missiles so he could strike deep within Russia. And Russia basically said that once NATO starts supplying long-range missiles to attack Russia, that they are directly at war with Russia, that NATO is directly at war with Russia. So this is coming under the threat of big warnings. And then the next day after that meeting, massive mushroom cloud. You know, it's seen from space, huge. I mean, I'm not going to play the video. It's but you know, it looks like a nuclear explosion, or it looks like they've hit. You know, it looks terrible, doesn't it? It just looks terrible, and it's been going for days, and you know, it's the explosions coming out of it. It's just absolutely. I mean, look at the curve of the planet there, and look at the size of that explosion. Look at what appears to be almost like a shockwave coming out in all directions. I mean, I don't know what to make of that. I just don't know what to make of that. I mean, this is just on another level, guys. This is just on another level. And now we've had another base has just been destroyed. And do you remember in my last video I talked about how this massive process in Ukraine, a big part of this is desperately to try and get Russia to show its hand, so they really get an idea, because you understand that everything we're seeing here, what we're seeing here going off here, is so we're getting a bit of a window on this, because you know where this is going. It's going here, and here. So just to get the proportion of this, what I mean to say by that is, or what I'm suggesting by that is that what we're seeing here on the right there, if it is as bad as it looks, which we don't know if it is, but if it is, and let's be honest, it looks like it. It's like World War II level technology being used there. You know, this whole Ukraine thing, you know, as far as I was understanding, and I might be wrong here, and please correct me in the comments if I am wrong, but Putin was born in Ukraine. You know, Ukraine's his homeland. You know, so we think of the breakup of the Soviet Union was because they lost the Cold War. But they lost the Cold War, but you can see that if the Cold War could only end if both sides sought to win that ultimately it could only end in this. And if you're fighting a battle that can only end in that, and you want to change your tack, then one side has to let that whole type of ambition, this whole gathering of nuclear weapons and everything else like that, because there's no winning objective in that for either side. So we can run these wars in the Ukraine But as soon as they come to this, then that's not a game that anyone can play, because it has only one outcome. Now, if you can imagine back in the kind of 80s and 90s when all this was playing out, and then it would finally all fall apart in the late 80s, early 90s, and we would come into this kind of new era. We kind of saw that as the breakup of Russia, and then kind of like this idea that the old Russia was broken up and everything else like that, and it was, everything had changed. But you know, and we kind of thought this about China. You know, when the free trade deal was finally signed in, I don't know what the exact date, in the early 70s, when Nixon went out to see Deng Xiaoping, and when the current system that runs in the southern provinces, when China became one country, two systems, the system that was implemented. Remember, Deng Xiaoping was exiled because of his, what was considered capitalist views. But what he was suggesting was that what we see, the whole Yangtze River sits in the kind of the trade province that was created with the one country, two systems, with by Nixon and Deng Xiaoping, to create a kind of trade zone that was protected, where the corporations, any corporation operating in that was highly protected under intellectual property protection rights, just like the member state dispute system created in all these new free trade systems that enables countries to have access to certain amounts of technology because their intellectual property is protected, and so they can operate and trade in these zones, and so that part of China is like a if China just said, no, we're not doing business with you, we're going to do it our way and that sort of stuff, but by giving in and opening up this proportion, which was basically opening them up to complete slavery in a sense, because once these people entered in and worked in that trade zone, they left the communist China and they couldn't go back to communist China. They wanted to go and make it in the communist trade zone and have a go, and then they go there and they just become a slave to something, because the way it's worked in China is, you could make a million videos over how the Chinese have actually controlled the industry from the outside, but have, by funding so many corporations in China, have had access to technology that was otherwise protected under the power that protects that free trade zone. You know, it's like a corporate sovereignty. You know, it's like, you know, you basically, if anything corporation's doing, you can just go to a courtroom process, which is not a public process where intellectual property can't be kind of like accessed. Anyway, where I'm going with that is that we see that China had basically been involved in that, in one of these free trade zones, and we can see that Russia realized that by being in opposition, it was just going to be an enemy. So they dropped the oppositional side to their whole stance. They just realized there was just no winning objective, and so it kind of fell apart. But something else has obviously been developing, because you look at how strong China is now, and they changed their tack because they realized there was no way of fighting their way out of this. Anyway, this day here, when this happened, so ended the old-fashioned idea of war. You know, the First World War began with cavalry and kind of ended with tanks and bombers. The Second World War began with tanks and bombers and ended with nuclear high-tech explosions. So the Third World War can't, you know, Einstein said, if the Third World War starts, the Fourth World War starts with bows and arrows. This This is a no-brainer. This is not, there's nothing here that I'm not saying that is in any way new. This is not rocket science. This is common fucking sense. You know, this is just absolutely logical. You know, this idea that they just want to take, the narrative at the moment in the West is they want to take Putin to the point where he feels he could lose. And if he feels he could lose, then he can come to the table. But to get him into the position where he feels he could lose the Third World War, to get him to that point where he might consider he might lose it, is surely absolutely starting it. And this is this kind of narrative that is kind of leading to this. So this can't go down this corridor. So we see this going off. We're just like, okay, so this is reaching this next stage. Because I'm just thinking, oh my God, as soon as we see these being, you know, US and UK delay Ukraine's missile decision. Well, then we're hearing Russia shoots down British Storm Shadow missiles over Ukraine. And we're looking again at something like this. And we're told this was done by drones, one of their most unbelievably secure, supposedly bomb depots. Highly secure, supposedly bomb-proof, and taken out by a drone. Do I believe that? Do the Russians believe that? Do you believe that? Does anyone believe that? That it was taken by a highly secure thing deep in Russia, the day after Zelensky walks away saying, I got what I wanted. I got what I came here for. You know, it's, we truly do not know, but we, you know, and then the day after this, we see, we're seeing the pages go off. And just horrific injuries to faces and to hands and torsos, and just utterly unbelievable. And yeah, it's it means that this war's taking, this is Israel, as far as I can see, showing its hand. They say they're taking this war to a kind of a new phase. And you know, I have always marvelled at the fact that, you know, when these electric cars that have these electric batteries that are kind of prone to fires, when they're kind of like, when they're in these container ships and they're transported across massive oceans where they're in a container ship for a very long time, and lots of salty air, lots of salty water, very corrosive for circuits and that sort of stuff. You can imagine if salt water did get into certain places, it could cause all sorts of shorts, and shorts could feed to, you know, big batteries. Who knows, you know? But when you hear about these fires in these containers, supposedly cars in the containers, they're like they kind of seal up each part of the container that stores the cars. So even if there is a fire, there's no way that any more air can get in, so they get starved of oxygen. But the problem they've had with electric vehicles is that they produce their own oxygen. As the combustion process goes, the whole process produces its own oxygen. And the only thing I know that does a very similar thing to that is yeah, well, you know, when they create, you know, there's certain types of explosives that are well, I mean, you know, it's just, I don't know, I'm suddenly thinking how much I can say and everything else like that, and just like on the YouTube channel, but it's without kind of prompting fear about what I'm using right now, what I'm sitting in front of right now, what's all around me in so many devices these things that produce their own oxygen, because when you can produce your own oxygen in a reaction, you can make the reaction much quicker. Like an engine, for example, has to kind of like, it takes the petrol and it has to suck in air. Even when you get an explosion with petrol, it's quite a slow explosion. And if you can slow an explosion down, you can get it to pick more stuff up. And if you can get away from all the debris, like, if you, so there's these stories of certain people jumping on grenades at the point they explode. So though the explosion goes off, the shockwave can't get a chance to increase in velocity. So there's much less debris, much less. If you can literally you can apparently, whether it's really true now, I don't know, but you can really deaden a hand grenade if you. I don't know if you have Rasputin, didn't he kind of dive on the explosive and demonstrate that he saved he stopped an assassination attempt by just throwing himself on the device, and it just went poof, but had no chance to pick up speed and velocity and objects along, and it's slow. What we would see is a fast explosion, but a much slower reaction that picks up more debris and moves it out, and that's the debris that does the damage. And and you're dealing with something that's got all that mixture all the way through it. And if the right thing excites that high enough, then it's an explosive situation. And I was kind of old-fashioned thinking. I've still been old-fashioned minded because of where I come from. I'm thinking that if they were to shut down our internet and everything else like that, they'd probably go for the the underwater lines, and it would be submarines going after big underwater lines and everything else like that. But they're more than prepped for that, because they've got all these satellites up in Elon Musk satellites up in space to kind of like to run that whole network of communications without cables. It would just be a hindrance. It would slow things down, but I can't see it would stop it. And the same goes, it's kind of like it's kind of an 80s view of kind of like shutting down the whole grid by chopping the wires. It's just like, hang on, aren't we in the wireless era? It's kind of like this is the kind of level of technology that we're going into now. This is if this is the next level of this, and we've all got to take stock of what we're sitting on, what risks we're taking, what massive risks we're taking all the time. What risk am I taking right now, sitting next to this device, talking about this? What's the next level of this? And if a similar thing, say someone wanted Britain to be the Trojan horse. I predicted in my book that Britain would become the Trojan horse to break up the European alliance and feed Europe into a war against Russia, because that's what I saw unfolding in my whole experience. That enabled me to write that and publish that back in 2011. Telling people we don't want to leave Europe. They would say, we're not going to leave Europe. I'm like, you don't understand. We are going to desperately attempt to leave Europe, and if we leave Europe, our fate is absolutely sealed. That was always a message I was shouting out for a long time. That was what was shown to me. I was showing Britain as the Titanic. And I say, why do you show me the Titanic like that? For the messages I was getting doing the process that I do to connect with what I consider to be divine, the divine source in the process that I use. And that's kind of a process that was taught to me by my mother and father, both channels, both divinely beautiful people on a divine pathway to connect with divinity and do their best. And I feel like an alien in this world at the moment. That's the truth be told. But we come right to that point I talked about in Laughing Gas. You know, it's like I don't know if I've been able to really change anything really. You know, I can't see much of an outcome for my own country in this now. You know, and so when I see that earthquake going off here, I kind of like as for that volcano going off here, and I kind of look at the 61 volcanoes that were going off by the kind of like mid-October last year, and the exponential increase, and how war exacerbates this. You know, John and Whitecloud all gave me the same message when I was a kid, that what drives all of this is choice, human choice, and we will make it easy or make it as hard as we wish to make it. And my own message in through this, when I connected and I wrote Laughing Gas, and I had my opportunity of connecting with the gods and asking all my questions and opening this door as I'd been taught how to open, you know, not by any special trick or anything else like that, but just by dedicating myself to my practice. Dedicating myself to my practice, meeting my intentions of the connections that I wish to make with a dedicated practice, and committing to that practice and working with that. And also my first message, when I got my big communication, it wasn't my first message, I'd had many, but some of the original, my biggest download, I couldn't even believe it had happened. It just took me 2 years to even kind of like, it could barely even look. It took me a year before I could even try to find the what I'd written, because it was so overwhelming. And then I'd read Donald Walsh's Conversations with God in India, the second year of the year. A year later, I was in Goa, and I was writing a much lighter part of my writing, and it had been so heavy. I'd got all these answers, and I was working with all this information, but it was too intense to go to the actual file where that had actually all occurred, and I'd had this big communication. Anyway, I couldn't find it anywhere, and I finally realised it was lost, or possibly that the whole experience I'd had of writing that whole thing up in the mountains was actually a vision unto itself. And that was and I'd begun to much more believe that that was the case, that the experience I'd had and the whole download and everything was a vision, that me sitting at my desk having that whole experience was a vision from start to finish. And then me just finally sitting at my desk when the vision stopped, where I was anyway, and not even kind of realizing that I'd come out of a vision. And I genuinely kind of believed that. And so I went back to the third year I'd been writing in the mountains, and the third year I went back up to Manali, where this experience had happened 2 years back, and tried to relive this experience and go through the whole thing again and see if I could tap through and have the same conversation again. And then I got to the end of Laughing Gas, the last chapter of Laughing Gas, and I didn't know it was the last chapter of Laughing Gas. I was just in a euphoric state when I finally realised. I just suddenly realised, oh my God, that's a whole frigging book. That is a whole frigging book. And then I couldn't believe it. I didn't want it to end, because this wonderful door that I'd opened with this communication to and fro, this, I've managed to give you all of these messages that I've had when I'd opened that communication, and I'd kept that conduit open and working with my mother and father to allow that conduit to exist so I could have these conversations for the first time for me and ask the questions that I wanted to ask, even though I'd got the information. I couldn't look at the file because it was so overwhelming. And then finally, I'll say a year later in Goa, I tried to find it. I couldn't find it anywhere. I got frustrated. And then I'd read Donald Walsh's kind of like works, and he'd had a similar conversation to my experience. And so I was just like, okay, so I'm going to go out to the back of the mountains. And I went to the back of the mountains, and I kind of remembered, I've got to this kind of, didn't realise it was the end of the book. But everything just said, go and have a hot spring. And there's these hot springs up in the mountains, up in a place called Vashisht, which is very close to kind of like Manali. And Manali, ironically, is where Lord Manu, who landed with his boat after the Great Flood. So you've got Mu on the other side, you've got Manu on that side, then you've got the stories of, as you go closer to the Middle East, you've got the stories obviously of Noah, and so there's all these different stories of this great flood. But this is where, ironically, that I was writing Laughing Gas and understanding all my other stories about the Noachian times and all that I've talked about in other videos. And So I went off to have a hot spring. It was very late at night. I went off and it had been snowing, really heavily snowing. So I was trekking across the mountains. Very, very dangerous to go at night across that type of snow. But anyway, I had to do it. I was charged to go and find these hot springs and get into the hot springs through the snow. And I managed to get to Vashi. Crazy, like really unbelievably dangerous journey. And I got into the hot springs. They were so hot. They were painful to get in because they were so hot. I got in the hot spring and I sat inside. There was steam coming up everywhere. You couldn't see anything. There was no one around. It was about 11 o'clock at night or something like that. And I think someone comes and locks them up when they get really late. So it was getting really late, but they hadn't quite closed. So it wasn't, it was that sort of time. I was in the hot water, steam everywhere. And this man just walks in. He walks in like the water wasn't hot. Just casually gets in. He can't see me at first, but he gets in, and I see him getting in, and I see him getting into the steam and disappearing. And I said to him, "Oh, you did that like it weren't even hot." And he looked up and he said, "Ah." So I thought I'd find someone down here. And I said, "Oh, hi," and and he walked over to me, and he sat next to me, and he said, "I've got a message for you." And I was like, okay. And he said, "You finished." And as he said it, I kind of felt the intensity of the motion he brought with that when he said that whole transition of what that was on a bigger level. It wasn't just that I got to the end of the book, I finished the book. It was just that I'd finished a phase of this process in terms of this connection to the divine, in that same sense, that there was a time to kind of like, in Buddhism they call it having your breakfast, where you go out and you touch divinity, and it's like number 7, number 8 and number 9. Number 7 is you touching the divinity. And this is ongoing cycles that you're going to go through in all life, and touching divinity and realizing there is absolute divinity is like number 7. Being in service to divinity is with the realization of seeing divinity, coming into service of divinity is also when you're coming into service of something greater. That's chaos, because you're letting go of your ideas of how things should be, and you're coming into service of something higher. So you're kind of doing something for the better, something for a higher purpose. And so to get to a place where you give over control, you surrender control to a higher cause, is going through the doorway of chaos, which is number 8, which is why number 8 divides 7 and 9. And 9 is the number of service. And my mum used to talk about this a lot. And so to arrive at 9, the last point, before you begin the whole new cycle, and you come back, you are initiated back into 10, which is a 1 again, and we go through these kind of cycles of kind of like, and this cycle repeats itself over and over and over as we get blown apart by the next level of the miracle, and that sends us into the chaos, and then we feel the sadness of seeing all the wonders and all the woes of the wonders and the wonders of the woes and everything, because when we see good and bad, we see the full spectrum, we see all the wonderful things, but we see all the painful things also, and they're sad to see, and they cause us sadness. And so we become, to find happiness, we've got to become the resolution of those sort of things. Anyway, he said, "You finished," and I kind of like, I knew what it was about, and I was just like, when I knew it was a whole cycle, that I was now going to have to kind of change my modus operandi, come back and push this and finish this book, and then this was going to be the spear that I was going to run with. This was going to be me sharpening my spear, and then I was going to have to poke my head out of the bunker and run until they took me down. This would be my chance. This would be where I would kind of jump up, and this would be me carving my spear. And there would be a time where I would have to poke my head out of the bunker and run and be a warrior of light with the spear of wisdom. And that's how I envisaged it when he said that. It was like it meant something. It was an end of one thing, beginning of something new. And then he said, "There's something else. There's another message." And I said, "Well, yeah, and he said, is there be something you've been trying to do? And of course I've been trying to have this conversation, trying to open up this conversation as I'd done before, and it was just like, oh. I said, yeah. And he said, you can go and do it now. You can go and do it now. And so I said, well, I could just go home and do it. And then he looked down as if to get a confirmation of that. And then he looked back and he went, yeah. His name was Lionel. If he ever comes across chances upon this video, or if you happen to kind of like know Lionel, he's a bit cosmic. He spends times up in the Himalayas. He's probably sannyasin, because a lot of sannyasins up in the because I follow Osho a lot. Not that I follow Osho because of my time with up in the mountains where the sannyasins hang out, but because they probably don't do that anymore. That was years ago. It's I've got to remember, I'm old now, and they were kind of like the aging hippies when I was youngster. So they're all kind of like old age peas now and all the rest of it. Ironically, is one of the oldest sannyasins I know who was he was Osho's body worker, and he's kind of like when he does his kind of like I was going to say his name then. His name's completely slipped out of my head then, and I know his head on the top of my. I know his name off the top of my, all the time because he's an absolute hero. And yet today I just go to think of his. It's funny how names work like that. I can remember so many complex names, and that's Satyati. That's his name, and but he teaches me. I do all this kind of. I've done all this deep tissue myofascial bodywork. When he starts his myofascial bodywork, he's just dances around. Anyone who was close to Osho, he just comes out beautiful. Really, his message was very beautiful. He was absolutely amazing person to. I've got a big connection with him. A very cosmic man. But anyway, he said, "Is there anything you said you can go and do it?" So I went back to my truck, and I went back to my little place. I was renting this little place. It was like £20 a month, something silly, for this house looking over this ravine, just vertical drop, just eagles and kind of like just everything, just vultures, just catching the thermals around. Anyway, I went back to my place and I sat down at my computer and I just wrote. I said, "You're there, aren't you?" And I immediately got the answer, and I wrote the answer down as he spoke. He said, "I've always been here." And I opened up the discussion with him, but the funny thing was, before we opened up that, and I had a cognitive conversation as I'd had before, but it was also shocking. I'd asked all my questions in one big fast swoop before, and realised how much I was being worked with on so many other levels when it was happening, that I was understanding not just the communication I was having, I was understanding a lot of other things that had been happening to me that I'd not been cognitively aware of. Suddenly became much more aware of my own process of connection and how Great Spirit works with me constantly, and how I'm working with Great Spirit constantly, and this process that I'm going through, and how I'm full-blown weirdo, parents, weirdo channels. It's come from a family of, weirdos. Just difficult to get your head around because it makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. I was brought up with that. It was just like, it just comes with the territory. It's but I said, he said, "I've always been here." He said, David, you understand. You came to me. You knocked on my door. What led you here at every juncture was choice. Choice is to understand your line of inquiry, your lines of inquiry. You know, and I see that, and I've had to kind of, and as well, there's a chapter in Laughing Gas called Emotional Mouse, and I'm sorry I haven't been able to make messages and do all the sort of things that I really wanted to hope to do in the fashion that I was hoping to do, but emotionally, when you understand that when I put dates on this, as I do, every time I do that, and I put myself under an enormous pressure, which unless you ever do that, you will never truly know what I go through when I do that. And every day for all these videos that I've made over the years, has been, every one of those has been a birth of new white hairs and just a massive weight on my physiology, because my body just says, why the hell are you doing it? And it's very difficult for many people to consider and look at this whole thing. And unfortunately, it's our non-action which is the biggest cause of the problem. We just don't believe it's happening. None of this we believe. You know, we can see how vulnerable we are just by our own technology and where the next level of this cyber attack is likely to go. And it's, you know, how many more videos am I going to produce before, you know, if someone wants to turn Britain into a war machine, just take away the food, right? Shut down the banking system, shut everything down, get everyone starving, crank out the blame whoever you want to be the target of all that aggression and direct that all towards an enemy. You know, it's the world population has gone from something like 1.3 billion in 1850 to 7 billion, you know, barely 150 years later. It has increased exponentially with the massive use of nitrous-based fertilizers, a massive population increase, you know, and most of that's been done by fertilizer, bought and paid for with US dollars that have been driving and paying for the production of that nitrous-based fertilizer through the production of the ammonia and all the rest of it that has to happen to make nitrous-based fertilizer, and the massive energy consumption of its manufacture. Plus all these high explosives that are made using the same similar techniques. You know, all paid for by the US dollar, and you can see if the US dollar goes down, then and the whole system is ground to a halt. And you can see that it's like a monster out of control. You can see people inside of the machine and outside of the machine. No one knows how to stop it. No one knows. It's a behemoth. It's a freight train of absolute out of control carnage that no one can seem to stop, that just keeps inflating, that just keeps it's super taxes inflation. You know, it could just be, we could be all using $100 trillion notes in 5-10 years if it carries on like this. if it could carry on like this, except that the entire world will be consumed in its wake, because it's not based on any real value. It's an arbitrary value based on the movement of money. So the more money you move, the more money you can print, and the more money you can inflate, the more that you can deflate the money, the more money you can keep moving to repay the debt, which is just getting endlessly deflated with the currency itself. That it can just keep going until all the time the one who controls it is more powerful than the other, then it can just keep going. And where we're at is at the end of that. We're at the wall of that process. We're at an economic wall where everyone's got the same level of technology, and it can't be used on the table because it's just too fantastical that it can only go to a total new level of warfare. Which means that big changes lie ahead. You've got to start thinking about where all, consolidating what you have, thinking about where all the stuff that you have right now, how, because you've got one last angle to think about on this, is if we were expecting a big flyby, a big event that was going to cause electromagnetic burst, unbelievably high burst in Schumann resonance, unbelievably high burst of amperage in kind of like in the field that just melts circuitry, batteries explode, the whole shaboodle just goes off simultaneously. Like in this truck I've got leisure batteries. I don't care if my leisure batteries explode because they're in a contained box down there. If they go bang, I've had leisure batteries, I've had lead acid batteries explode. Not too sure about AGMs. I imagine AGMs might go off with a bit of a bang, but I think they're lead acid basically. They're similar to lead acid anyway. But what about all my other batteries? I'm sitting right next to a charge controller there. Sitting right in front of a load of batteries in my computer here. I've got my power tools. Crazy times. Crazy times. Anyway, the Britons and Israel together here over these last few days have crossed the Rubicon, I think. It's looking after someone with no fingers, no eyes for the rest of their lives. You're seeing the face of this now. The next level of this. Can't see the planetary thing. Why they need to plunge the vibration, the desperate anger they're desperately trying to sow into this whole thing. Can't fight your way out of this. Can't fight your way out of this. But we need to start thinking preparation time now. What happens if the banks go down? How close should you be to your technology? How close are you to batteries? Russia's hands being seriously pushed in this. How much longer can they last? If Britain is using what, which I don't know if they are, but like in most people, I wouldn't be at all surprised. It means that we are actually on very high alert. It's reached a new phase. And the outcome for my country is almost set in stone. And they're too blind to see it. Why? In 1588, when the Spanish Armada set sail and was scuttled, because John D, Elizabeth's commander. No, sorry, he's her advisor. Told her that she couldn't engage the Spanish Armada in an act of war. They couldn't directly engage because it would be aggressive, and then they were of war. There was no fighting way out of this. They had to leave it to the gods. It could only be left to the gods if they tried to conduct war at that critical point, just like the Catholics did. Except you understand, this wasn't really the Catholics, this was the Spanish. Yeah, the Spanish were Catholics. But actually the real powerhouse was in Venice, and you were seeing this massive powerhouse developing Spain. Spain was becoming more powerful than Venice itself. So Spain was kind of enticed into doing this massive invasion because of their belief that they were all powerful when this thing was flying by. And then they go in and do the biggest invasion, even by today's standards. Biggest naval fleet to ever set sail, and not one of those ships gets to the British shores. They all get, so Elizabeth tells her captains and commanders to kind of set fire to half the fleet. There's mutinies and everything, but eventually the orders are kind of like followed. Half the fleet is set ablaze, and sure enough, just as John D said, a massive storm blew up and blew the burning ships into the massive docked fleet, and the fleet went up in flames, and those that tried to escape it had to cut their anchors, and then the storm just got bigger and it just blew them all away. And those that kind of survived had to go via the North Sea and then cut round to the Atlantic and then make their way down past Ireland. They wanted nothing to do with them because their missions had failed. They were the embarrassment. It was just like, we want nothing to do with you. So they just had to carry on, broken, starving, back down to kind of make their way down to Spain and Portugal and via the Atlantic. And they, what happened to, same thing that happened to Rome. They thought they could start massive, they were all so powerful, and then this thing that came in, 262, they were decimated by it. This country that lived by war, and it was told, it was prophesied that their end would come if they carried on with their warring, aggressive ways. Their days would come, and sure enough, this massive event just came and wiped them off. They were decimated. Earthquakes all across Asia, all across Europe, all across Africa. 3 days of darkness, famines, the whole works. They were decimated. That's when we say the Goths sacked Rome. It was an event. So every time a country goes full on with war, invariably they start believing that they are the holy gods that are really talked about, the real celestial beasts in the sky that I show on my channel, that are the real kind of gods themselves, these massive planets that are the power behind the gods as we see them. And those who think that these powers come here to give them the power of war, they get periodically taken down. To me, the challenge of this is for all the different enemies is to try and entice their enemy in attacking. and going into a state of war. For Britain, we've just crossed the line. We are now, it seems, maybe not, maybe this hasn't happened, we just don't know, but if Britain is now doing that, and because of the Kursk invasion, which is a direct invasion into Russia, you know, it's this is now direct invasion at the worst time you can do a direct invasion, and the type of bombs and the bomb shells that we've been using on the battlefield to eliminate the tanks, and we know what's in those bombs, what they're covering Ukraine with, the market garden of Europe, what once was. Britain is in a precarious place right now. You know, if I was in, well, I am in England. If I was going to say if I was in Britain now, and of course I am in Britain right now. And I'm surrounded by dangerous devices. Seemingly. I mean, there was all this talk I saw about, oh, there have been devices put into these pages and blah, 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 but maybe there has been, but by sheer logic of what actually the characteristics we're seeing of lithium ion and the energy stored in them and their reactions of the release of that energy in one fell swoop rather than a slow burn. And we see how much it releases of one of those cars in one moment. The energy pouring out of those cars in any one moment when those fires are going off, and you see those batteries. The concept of all of that energy releasing in a single burst. Wow. 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 You know, everything's up in the air now. You want to be realistic about your plans. Because it looks like, you know, it could also be the fact that, I was going to say that really was that it's just a warning. It's like, you know, Putin said he would use a kind of like a tsunami bomb, whatever that is, bomb that makes a tsunami. It's very convenient because we can see that Britain is the kind of tsunami hotspot, especially Western, where they built Hinkley Point is the kind of tsunami hotspot of Western Europe, where it bottlenecks between Wales and Somerset, and they built a nuclear power station right at the end where the last tsunami struck back in 1606 on the 20th of January. I find that quite strange. And all this talk that they could detonate all these devices. Imagine if loads of devices were about to go bang and they were going to try, and this was a whole theatre show to try and make what's about to happen look like an enemy attack. To turn whatever the effects of whatever is about to happen into the idea that someone else has done it. Anyway, bit of a waffle. So much love, so much light. You know, we've just got to work our way through this. See if what it is. You know, our countries are, my country certainly is. You know, Keir Starmer's been 77 days in power. And he's trying to get permission to drop storm shadows on Russia 77 days into his term. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. They want to take this to the next level. Who's this, Shanti? Who's that? Who's that? Who's that? Shanti's just saying hello there. I don't know if we're going to get this big flyby. I don't know if I've got that right or wrong. I might have had it completely wrong, and maybe it's really, we just don't know. It's the only flyby we've never experienced in our epoch. This one that I'm assuming has to go out at some point. We've seen all the comings in, but we've never seen the final going out of the big one. If that really happens, if that ever even happens, if that I've really got that right. But, you know, when I built my first model back in 2015, it was all built on the understanding that the sun was the centre of it all. And as you can see by my long astronomical inquiry, that is just not the case. That we live in a complex binary system, which is probably better than a tertiary system, or a, however you want to say it, but it's kind of a complex binary system. And that boils down to fundamental changes in the way in which you see and I see the astronomical model. Because once you actually bring that in, if you're in the old-fashioned kind of like paradigm of a heliocentric model of a sun in the centre and all the planets orbiting around it, the idea of something in the centre and this kind of like with all the planets moving around it, and then this kind of the old traditional understanding of planet X coming into our sun, taking 3,600 years to do a cycle round. The sun obviously is just static in the middle, and these objects come in, they go around, and they come back out, and they go round, and this whole cycle takes 3,600 years. You can imagine it's coming in closer to go around the sun, to go somewhere between potentially Earth and Jupiter or somewhere in between, that sort of thing, go to that sort of loop, not get too close to the sun, because remember planet X is supposed to be massive in this understanding, and planet X goes around, takes 3,600 years. You can imagine when you're in the last kind of 80 years and you're going really, 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 really close, and you're going to go through, and that whole transition, how do you elongate that to the point where we've seen, like where Carlos Rada makes a massive prediction on the 20th of January, again, 1939, and says that earthquakes will occur exactly at this date, and then all of the sequences that I can put in that fit in with his dates, and you can show the entirety of it and see all the movements and the absolute the clockworkness of the movements of these objects, and how accurately all these things come and go, and see all that we've seen. And the massive increase in volcanoes, earthquakes, crazy storms that have been in accordance and in running parallel with the massive increase in sightings and the sizes and the absolute unbelievable spectra of seeing these things. And what can we do? What can I do? I guess there will be an after all of this. And then what we will be after this is as interesting as where and who and how we'll be. You know, but I think that they're not going to get humanity. The message I was given is that humanity is not a planet of war. It's not considered by the gods and the higher realms to be a planet of war. It is considered to be a planet subverted with war. That war is not our agenda, it's the agenda which subverts us, and that's why there's massive help happening here. But we're seeing the face of this. And we can't fight our way out of it. But we can prepare. We can invite in the highest help to assist us through this transition. We can recognise that we are not part of this problem. We're not wanting this or causing this. And try and break from the guilt of this whole process. Because a big part of this whole process is the blame that will then be attributed to all those that have allowed this to happen. Or haven't tried to speak against it or stop it. There's going to be a lot of guilt, and guilt is the key weapon in this for slaying souls, as in capturing souls. Souls are captured with guilt. With guilt. Making people do heinous crimes and then directing the blame against them and using that blame to wield and control them. Guilt and blame are the keys to the devil's spell books. When this all goes pop, if things go south, which they're looking to, in my opinion, for Britain, and well, you know, we're talking about the Atlantic being seriously affected by this, in my opinion. There'll be a lot of guilt on a soul level. And you'll have to try and work a way through that guilt. Right action now is the only way to try and get yourself above that level, that threshold that will drag you down. It's like it has its own human resonance, its own kind of electromagnetic energy. Really, it's a form of karma unto itself. It's whether you are part of the problem or part of the solution. And you're going to come to that juncture. Each and every one of us will have to come to that juncture. That's why I wrote Laughing Gas, because I saw that juncture. And in my vision, I'd done nothing to try and stop it, done nothing to bring awareness to what's really causing this. I was all wrapped up in stupid sound bites dreamt up by environmentalists, but getting paid billions to greenwash us, to make massive amounts of money greenwashing us, creating religions, taking Jesus off the cross and putting the earth on the cross. The world planet was dying because of my sins. I needed to buy a newer, cleaner car and consent to building nuclear power stations on tsunami fault lines in the name of stopping massive volumes of carbon dioxide spewing out of volcanoes. Anyway, I'm not going to edit this video because it's too long. It's just too waffly. You don't have to watch it. It's just me waffling on a little bit. I'm sorry it's a long one. I'm not, you know, it's kind of like my kind of, I might be right, I might be wrong about this coming flyby. I just don't know. Talking about it and putting a line on it, you know, I'm expecting this event that you see on screen now to be happening and to be getting a lot worse over the next month, over the next weeks. We will see. You know, make your divine connection, keep that open, and do the very best you can through this. You know, am I going to be walking around with a mobile telephone and everything else like that? Or any of us in even 2 weeks from now? This is escalating fast. Lots of things are about to go crazy. You know, this thing will slide off the shelf in hours when it goes, and then it will start sinking fast. And being prepared for that is a logical kind of preparation there. In lots of ways. But you won't fight your way out of this. Peace is the only way out of this. Peace is the only way out of this. So you want to be with your communities and working with people you love. Think about the dangerous things in your life right now as well. Where to keep those kind of types of, dangerous things. Where to put them. Sorry, I can't give you more right now. I think there will be an after all of this, and we're on the other side of something, and it all makes a little bit more sense. I feel that we will get to that point. Because right now, people like me are just madmen. Just madmen. And what is considered normal in this world is, to me, is just utter insanity. Honey in the heart, 1,000 thank yous. Take care. Bye-bye.